Places on the admin portal where you can set your sequence settings. One is from the grant editor programs. You'll see that each program is designated a sequence that you can also toggle when you've got that program selected. The second place is from the grant editor program cycles editor. And within each program cycle, you'll be able to set that sequence as well. Now, by default, your programs are going to appear to you in alphabetical order, but the sequence number is what determines the order that they appear to your applicant on the current programs and applications page, which is what we're looking at over here on the right. So right now, because folk and tradition is set to sequence 1 and community support is set to sequence 2, our folk and tradition program cycles come first, and then they're followed by the community support cycles that are active. And the way that the sequence number initially gets assigned is just in the order that your program is created. So if we were to create a 6th program right now, that sequence setting would be 6 by default. But you essentially use the sequence dropdown to determine the order that works best for your cycles. Now, the first order of operation for the system is to look here at this sequence setting. So right now, we're telling the system folk and tradition comes first, then community support, then media tools, and so on. The second order of operation that the system uses is to come to the grant editor program cycles and look at that sequence setting here. So right now, because our program is set to sequence 2, but our sequence for the program cycle is set to 1, we're basically telling the system community support as a program comes second, but community support grant application comes first, where our reimbursement form is just displayed second in that group. So this is the ideal way you're going to want to manage your program cycles and your programs if you always want to group all of the cycles together per program, meaning if we had a second folk and tradition cycle open, that it would show up just after the application if that's the way you set your program cycle sequence. But a second way to manage all of this is very often to intermix cycles across programs, meaning maybe you want to group all of your cycles by application date followed by secondary forms like reimbursement or final report. So you'd actually want to intermix some of these things like community support so that they're showing up in different orders. If that's the case, I recommend sort of zeroing out that program sequence, sort of nullifying it. And by that, I mean we would set all of our program sequences to the same number, and I'd recommend just using 1. So in this example, let's say we're going to do that for at least community support and folk and tradition, but you can do this for any or all of your programs as well. So for community support, we want to set that sequence number to 1 as well. So I'm going to click on that name. I can now modify the name or the sequence. I'm going to change that toggle to 1 and click update. So now we'll see that both of these are set to 1, which tells the system we're not so concerned about which of the orders the whole program as a chunk gets displayed. We're more concerned about that program cycles editor sequence. So from here, we're going to go to that program cycles editor and start to manage the order from there. So let's say we want the community support grant application to show up first actually in all of these because it's got the most recent open date. So if that's the case, I want to come in, I'm going to leave the sequence at 1, but I want my reimbursement form to actually show up below the folk and tradition, which is going to take the number 2 spot. So I'm going to change reimbursement form to sequence number 3, even though right now it sits at 2. So I'm going to change that to 3 and click update at the bottom. And then the last thing I want to do is change that folk and tradition application sequence. So I'm going to grab that program and that cycle, and I'm going to change that sequence number to 2. So now basically what I've told the system is at the program level, these have the same weight. At the cycle level, I want it to go community support application, folk and tradition application, community support reimbursement form. So now that I've done that, telling the system that by using that sequence number on the program cycles, once I update and save that setting, and I come back over here and I refresh, I'll see that the order is what I was hoping for. Community support application is followed by folk and tradition application, is followed by community support reimbursement. And you can do that going down the whole line. So if you have upwards of 10 active cycles at a time and you've set all of the program sequence to the same number, you may be up into sequence number 8, 9, 10 at your program cycles level, because what you're basically saying is, I want to manually say this one's going to go in the 4th spot, this one goes in the 5th, in the 6th, and so on, versus saying I just want to do it by program, and sequence 1, 2, or 3 is probably enough to manage all of your active cycles per program. So those are the 2 main ways that you're going to order the cycles that are active as far as how your applicant is going to see them on that current programs and applications tab. Now you can retoggle these numbers anytime, and so it may make sense to shuffle these a few times during your grant season so that the appropriate cycles appear toward the top of your page as cycles open and close. So even though you've got these set to 1, 2, and 3, maybe a month from now you open a new organizational support grant and you want that to appear up top, then you're going to want to make sure that that sequence number sets it in that appropriate place from both the program cycles and the programs tab.